At Christmas dinner, the walls of my parents' estate were made of glass, but the air inside was thick enough to choke on. I waited until the roast beef was served, until the wine was poured, until they were perfectly comfortable in the illusion of their wealth. Then I asked quietly if the hospital had confirmed the $340,000 deposit for my brother's spinal surgery. My father didn't even look up from his plate. He laughed a short, sharp sound. He said, "Oh, we used that capital for Beau's 30 under 30 launch party instead. A brand is forever, Margot. A bad back is just temporary." I set my fork down. The metal clicked against the china, the only sound in the room. "So, I guess you still don't know who actually needs that surgery." Their faces went pale immediately. "Stop right there. If you were sitting at that table, holding a forkful of roast beef, and your parents just admitted to spending life-saving surgery money on a party, would you flip the table, or would you go stone-cold silent? Drop a comment below. I want to know your fight-or-flight response." I didn't flip the table. I didn't scream. I stood up, put on my coat, and walked out into the snow. The engine of my car was the only warmth in the entire Hudson Valley that night. As I drove away from the estate, watching the glass house glow in my rearview mirror like a beautifully lit cage, my mind didn't spiral into grief. It shifted into audit mode. I am a forensic accountant. I spend my life tracking hidden assets and exposing financial lies for high-net-worth divorces and corporate fraud trials. I know how to follow the money. And for 10 years, the money trail has led directly from my bank account to my parents' vanity. My brother Beau isn't just an aspiring influencer. He is 26 years old with the spine of an 80-year-old. Degenerative disc disease. I was the one who found him crawling to the bathroom 6 months ago because his legs wouldn't work. I was the one who dragged him to the specialist. I was the one who got the quote, $340,000 for a reconstructive procedure that was his only shot at walking by 30. My parents called it dramatic. They said he just needed better posture and a better brand image. I liquidated everything. My stock portfolio, my 401k, the down payment I had been saving for a home of my own. I moved into a 400-square-foot studio apartment, eating instant oatmeal and working 80-hour weeks, sending every spare dollar to a joint account meant for that surgery. I did it because I thought I was saving my brother. But tonight, staring at the headlights cutting through the dark, I realized I hadn't been saving anyone. I had been feeding a beast. There is a concept in economics called the sunk cost fallacy. It is the tendency to continue investing in a losing proposition because of how much you have already put into it. You tell yourself that if you just put in one more dollar, one more hour, one more sacrifice, the investment will finally turn a profit. For a decade, I treated my parents' love like a failing stock. I thought if I paid off their credit cards, they would respect me. I thought if I funded their lifestyle, they would finally see me as a daughter, not just a resource. I thought if I saved their golden child, they would finally love the auditor. I kept paying because to stop would be to admit that the last 10 years of my life were a total loss. I was terrified of realizing that my investment was worthless. But tonight, when my father laughed about trading his son's ability to walk for a party, the market crashed. The valuation hit zero. I realized that affection wasn't a currency they possessed. I had been throwing gold into a black hole, expecting light to come back out. I pulled over to the side of the road, the heater humming against the silence. I wasn't sad. I was calculated. I checked the time. It was 9 in the evening on Christmas Eve. The banks were closed, but my laptop was in the trunk. The sunk cost fallacy only traps you if you refuse to cut your losses. I was done paying. It was time to liquidate the liabilities. I drove back to my apartment in silence. The city was quiet, settled into the deep freeze of Christmas Eve, but my mind was running at the speed of a high-frequency trading algorithm. When I walked into my studio, I didn't turn on the warm lamps. I didn't make tea. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop and logged into the banking portal. For years my father, Eric, had dismissed my career. He called forensic accounting glorified bookkeeping. He liked to say that men built empires and women just tidied up the receipts. But tonight, the skills he mocked were the weapons I would use to dismantle his life. I started with the venue. The luxury loft in Manhattan booked for Beau's brand launch was a $60,000 rental. My father had signed the contract, but because his credit was ruined from years of secret gambling, he had used me as the guarantor. That meant legal liability was mine, but so was the control. I pulled up the contract. I navigated to the cancellation clause. I typed in my authorization code. With one click, the venue was gone. I didn't feel a pang of guilt. I felt the cold satisfaction of balancing a ledger. Next came the credit cards. My stepmother, Jessica, loved her supplemental card. She treated it like a magic wand that made designer clothes appear without a bill attached. I pulled up the American Express portal. I watched the pending charges. A $3,000 catering deposit, a flight to Miami, a deposit for a custom suit for Beau. I selected the report lost or stolen option. Then I selected close account. I froze every single card linked to my credit profile. In a matter of seconds, their purchasing power vanished. They were stranded in their glass house with plastic that was worth less than the ice on the river. Finally, the joint accounts. These were the accounts I had poured my life savings into for the surgery. I flagged them for suspicious activity. I filed a formal fraud alert, citing unauthorized transfers to offshore entities. This would trigger an immediate freeze. No money in, no money out. My father wouldn't be able to buy a pack of gum, let alone launder money, until he answered to a bank investigator. I sat back in my chair. The screen glowed in the darkroom. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't thrown a single object. I had simply turned off the tap. My father thought he was the patriarch, the king of the castle. But he forgot that a king is nothing without his treasury. And I was the treasurer. The silence lasted exactly 45 minutes. Then my phone lit up. It wasn't a call. It was a notification from the extended family group chat. Jessica. She hadn't realized the money was gone yet, or maybe she had, and this was her preemptive strike. I watched the messages roll in. Please pray for Margot, she wrote. She is having a severe psychotic break due to work stress. She is hallucinating about stolen money and attacking us. We are terrified for her safety. I stared at the screen. It was a masterclass in narrative control. She was planting the seed of insanity so that when I spoke the truth, everyone would hear the ravings of a broken woman. She was gaslighting the entire bloodline. My phone started ringing. It was Beau. I answered, hoping for a moment of clarity, hoping he would ask about the surgery, about his spine. You cancelled the venue, he screamed. His voice wasn't weak or in pain. It was full of entitled rage. Do you have any idea how bad this makes me look? Influencers are flying in tomorrow, Margot. You are ruining my launch because you're jealous. I cancelled it because Dad stole your surgery money to pay for it, I said, my voice flat. Stop lying, he shouted. Mom told me you're off your meds. Just fix it, Margot. Fix it or you're dead to me. He hung up. He chose the party. Even facing paralysis, he chose the illusion. That was the moment the last thread of obligation snapped. Put the phone down. I thought the worst was over. I thought I would just weather the storm of angry texts until morning. I was wrong. At 2 a.m, a heavy pounding shook my front door. It wasn't the rhythmic knock of a neighbor. It was the authoritative slam of law enforcement. I walked to the door, my heart hammering against my ribs, and looked through the peephole. 2 uniformed officers stood in the hallway. Behind them, obscured by the shadows but unmistakable, was my father's personal attorney. Open the door. The officer didn't smile. Ma'am, we received a petition for an emergency involuntary psychiatric hold. A 5150. That's a mistake, I said, gripping the door frame. I am perfectly sane. We have sworn affidavits from your parents stating you threatened immediate self-harm and violence against your family, the officer recited. And we have these. He held up a printout. It was a screenshot of a text conversation. In it, a contact labeled Margot sent messages threatening to burn down the estate and end her own life. I looked at the paper. It was a fabrication, a digital forgery. My father hadn't just stolen my money. He had weaponized the mental health system to silence me. He knew that if I was locked in a psych ward for 72 hours, he could file for emergency conservatorship and regain control of the accounts I had just frozen. It was a trap and it was brilliant. This is fake, I said, but I could hear the desperation creeping into my voice, which only made me sound more unstable. We can't take that chance, ma'am, the officer said, reaching for his handcuffs. You need to come with us. I looked at the attorney lurking in the hallway. He gave me a small, pitying nod. I realized then that fighting physically would only prove their case. If I screamed, I was crazy. If I resisted, I was dangerous. My father had checkmated me using my own biology against me. I held out my wrists. The metal was cold, biting into my skin. As they walked me down the hallway, past my neighbors peering through their cracks, I didn't cry. Calculated. They thought this was the end. They thought they had neutralized the threat. But they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. They had put a forensic auditor in a room with nothing to do but think. The psychiatric holding room was exactly what you would expect. Beige walls, bolted down furniture, and the smell of industrial disinfectant trying to cover up the scent of fear. They took my shoelaces. They took my belt. And most crucially, they took my phone. I sat on the vinyl mattress, staring at the security camera in the corner. I had 72 hours. 72 hours for my father to file for emergency guardianship. 72 hours for him to access my accounts using a court order claiming I was incapacitated. 72 hours for Beau's spine to deteriorate further while he partied on borrowed time. Panic was a luxury I couldn't afford. Anger was a liability. In a place like this, emotion is diagnosis. If I screamed that I was framed, I was paranoid. If I cried, I was unstable. So I did nothing. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, breathing slowly, waiting for the attending physician. When Dr. Aris finally walked in, looking exhausted and skeptical, I didn't plead. I spoke in bullet points. My name is Margot. I am a forensic accountant. I am currently involved in a financial dispute with my family regarding the theft of $340,000. My father, Eric, filed this petition to prevent me from exposing his fraud. I am requesting my one phone call. I am calling Dr. Sawyer. Dr. Aris paused. He looked at my chart, then back at me. Dr. Sawyer, the neurologist. Yes, I said. He is my primary care physician for this matter. He has the records that prove why my family is doing this. It was a gamble. Sawyer wasn't just a doctor. He was my childhood friend. We grew up next door to each other before my parents moved to the glass house. He knew Eric. He knew the gambling. He knew the lies. An hour later, the door buzzed open. Sawyer walked in, wearing his white coat like armor. He didn't look at me with pity. He looked at me with fury. Not at me but for me. He walked straight to Dr. Aris and handed him a tablet. This is Beau's MRI from last week, Sawyer said, his voice hard. His L4 and L5 vertebrae are collapsing. He needs surgery immediately. Margot didn't threaten self-harm. She threatened to cut off the money supply that Eric stole to pay for a party instead of this surgery. He swiped to the next screen. And these are the bank transfer records Margot sent me before she was detained. They show Eric transferring the stolen medical funds not just to party vendors, but to a shell company in the Caymans. Dr. Aris looked at the screens, then at me. The skepticism in his eyes evaporated, replaced by horror. This is criminal, he muttered. Yes, I said. It is. Dr. Aris signed the discharge papers 20 minutes later. I'm releasing you immediately, he said. And I'm filing a report with the police regarding the fraudulent affidavit. You're free to go. Walking out of the hospital doors into the biting cold of the parking lot, I felt a shift. The fear was gone. The hesitation was gone. My father had tried to imprison me in my own mind. He had tried to take away my credibility, my freedom, my voice. He had made a fatal error. He assumed I would be too scared to fight back. He forgot that I spent my days hunting people who think they are smarter than the numbers. What now? Sawyer asked, unlocking his car. Do we go to the police? No, I said, climbing into the passenger seat. The police take months. The launch party is tonight. We go to the source. I opened my laptop, tethering it to Sawyer's phone. I didn't just want my money back. I wanted the truth to be undeniable. I dug deeper into the launch party expenses. I cross-referenced the vendor invoices my father had submitted to the bank before I froze the accounts. Catering, $50,000. Venue, $60,000. DJ, $25,000. I ran the tax ID numbers on the invoices. They were fake. The catering company didn't exist. The DJ was a Shell LLC registered to a P.O. box in Atlantic City. The venue contract was forged. My father hadn't spent $340,000 on a party. He had spent maybe $40,000 on a party to keep up appearances, and he had laundered the remaining $300,000 to pay off illegal gambling debts. He was in deep with loan sharks. He was willing to let his son be paralyzed not for a brand, but to save his own kneecaps. I looked at the spreadsheet. It was the most beautiful, damning thing I had ever seen. It was the glass house ledger. "Drive," I told Sawyer. "We're going to a party." The driveway of the estate was lined with rented Bentleys and hired security, a fortress of wealth built on a foundation of quicksand. I parked my sedan between a Porsche and a G-Wagon. I wasn't dressed for a party. I was wearing my court suit, charcoal gray, sharp lines, armor. I walked past the security team with a nod. They didn't stop me. To them I was just the daughter, the background noise, the one who paid the bills. They had no idea I was the demolition crew. Inside, the glass walls amplified the noise of 300 influencers and social climbers pretending to care about my brother's brand. My father stood on a raised platform, holding a microphone, basking in the spotlight. He looked majestic. He looked like a man who hadn't stolen $340,000 from his own son. "To Bo," Eric announced, raising a glass of champagne that cost more than my monthly rent. "To the Ramsey legacy. We build things that last." I stood near the audiovisual booth. The technician was a kid, maybe 20, distracted by his phone. I stepped up behind him. "I have the updated slide deck for the tribute," I said, my voice calm, authoritative. I didn't wait for permission. I unplugged the HDMI cable from his laptop and plugged it into mine. On the massive projection screen behind my father, the logo for Bo Ramsey Enterprises flickered and vanished. In its place, a spreadsheet appeared. The room went quiet. It wasn't the silence of awe. It was the confusion of people who realized the script had changed. The spreadsheet was simple. High contrast. Column A. Medical Trust Fund. Column B. Withdrawal, $340,000. Column C. Recipient, Atlantic City Shell LLC. "What is this?" Eric laughed nervously, tapping the microphone. "Technical difficulties, folks." I hit the next key. The screen changed. Now it was a split screen. On the left, a fake invoice for event consulting for $50,000. On the right, a wire transfer record to a known loan shark holding company. And in the center, looming over everything, was the MRI of Bo's spine, the L4 and L5 vertebrae grinding together, a black and white portrait of agony. "That is my brother's spine," I said. I didn't use a microphone. The room was so silent my voice carried to the back. "And that is where the money to fix it went. It didn't go to a party. It went to pay off Eric Ramsey's gambling debts." Eric turned. He saw the screen. He saw the numbers. And then he exploded. He didn't drop to his knees. He didn't weep for forgiveness. He threw his champagne glass at the wall, shattering it. "Turn it off," he screamed, his face turning a violent shade of purple. "You ungrateful bitch. Turn it off." This is what psychologists call a narcissistic injury. When a narcissist is confronted with their crimes, they don't feel guilt. They don't feel remorse. They feel shame. But not the healthy kind of shame that leads to redemption. They feel the scorching, unbearable shame of being seen without their mask. My father wasn't angry that he had stolen from his crippled son. He was enraged that the audience saw him do it. To him, the crime wasn't the theft. The crime was the exposure. He would rather his son be paralyzed in private than be humiliated in public. "It's over, Dad," I said. "The police have the records. The bank has the fraud alert. And now everyone knows." The guests didn't wait for an exit cue. They fled. The illusion of the Ramsey dynasty evaporated in seconds, leaving only the cold reality of a glass house filled with lies. Bo sat in his wheelchair by the stage, staring up at the MRI of his own broken body, finally seeing the price tag his father had put on his life. The fallout was swift and absolute. The loan sharks didn't care about family drama, but the FBI certainly cared about the wire fraud and money laundering. Eric was indicted 3 weeks later. The glass house, leveraged to the hilt and funded by fraud, was seized by the bank. Jessica, stripped of her credit cards and her social standing, moved back to her hometown, a pariah in the world she had tried so hard to conquer. Bo didn't get his party. He got reality. He collapsed physically the night of the raid, the stress finally breaking what was left of his mobility. He called me from the hospital, weeping, asking if I could help him, if I could pay for the surgery just one more time. I can't, I told him. I don't have the money. Dad stole it. But you have credit, he begged. You have a job. You can fix this. No, I said. I fixed it by exposing the truth. The house is being sold. The equity from the sale will go into a court-ordered trust for your surgery. That is your inheritance, Bo. The bricks and the glass. That's all there is. Hung up the phone. I stood outside the empty estate one last time. The for sale sign was already up. The snow had covered my tire tracks from Christmas Eve, washing the slate clean. I didn't feel happy. Happiness is a warm emotion, and I was still cold. But I felt light. The crushing weight of being the Atlas of the Ramsey family was gone. I had dropped the sky, and I was still standing. I got into my car and turned the key. I didn't look back at the house. You can't audit love, but you can certainly liquidate the liabilities. And today my balance sheet was finally zero. If you've ever had to be the villain in someone else's story just to survive your own life, hit that subscribe button. We're building a community of survivors here, and I want you in it.